my initial DM is usually just like, hey, you want to have a bowl of cereal and jam about what you do?
And
And a lot of people love cereal, like you said earlier. So it's
yeah.
like a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm down. That sounds dope.
Well, I think we're rolling on all cylinders. So, once again, thanks for tuning in. This is the Scoped Exposure Podcast. I am very excited to be sitting down with this gentleman on the other side of the screen. Caleb, how about you introduce yourself to the people who are watching and listening?
What is up, people who are watching and listening? I am Caleb Ralston. I do video. I love breakdowns, and I love just finding new music. So this is exciting. I love obviously checking out the page all the time and seeing new bands and seeing the craziness that happens live. So this is dope.
Yeah. And, Caleb's got a pretty interesting, playlist that we're going to get into and some career things as well. But I always like to get like a little bit of context for all of our guests because, it's one thing to jump into where you are now versus kind of where you came from. So how about you just give me a little like story of where you grew up, how you got to New York, where you are now, and how you just started getting into heavier music overall.
Yeah. So I grew up in a little town outside of Seattle, Washington, and I grew up like in kind of the church scene and being a part of my youth group. I did video there, volunteered, started getting into it, and at the same time, this kid from the church had invited my buddy and I to go see a show down in Seattle, which was like, a big deal. We're gonna drive down an hour down to Seattle. We grew up in a really small town, so I just remember we were driving down, and the show was August Burns Red, Acacia Strain, and My Children, My Bride. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I had never listened to anything metal, no metalcore, no hardcore, not even punk, nothing.
Right.
And I had just really grown up with like the traditional, like kind of like soft Christian music, if I'm being honest. And I remember going to the show, and Vincent comes out, and because ABR is like a Christian band and stuff, and a lot of the bands on the tour were Christian bands. And he comes out and he says something to the effect of like, we know that there's a lot of positivity on this tour, but we want to get really dark. Like, and I just remember feeling like, oh shit, this is a vibe. Like,
Yeah.
I can get with it. And everybody started like throwing their fists. And at first I thought like, oh fuck, like I'm going to get in a fight. You're cool with swearing on this shit, right?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, cool. I thought I was going to get in a fight because I just had no idea what was going on. And it took like 3, maybe 4 songs to kind of get like what was going on. And
right.
I fell in love. Like it's not quite as heavy as it is here in New York, but it's like a very, very intense scene. And I feel like it's the venue that I sought out is called El Corazon, and tiny venue, very intimate. It was just a really cool vibe. So I was hooked from the start. And at the same time, I was really into powerlifting, and the two kind of coincide. Like a lot of like metal overlaps with like the powerlifting and bodybuilding world. So I would lift to a lot of that shit, and just progressively got more and more into it. At the same time, was trying to build my video career. So I was working at a couple of different companies. Had been following this guy named Gary Vaynerchuk for a long time, and a friend of mine had told me that he was looking for video editors to join the VaynerX, like his whole company ecosystem.
Right.
He has a couple of different opportunities within that. And so my buddy told me like, hey, you should check this out, maybe apply. And at the time I had stopped consuming his content. He has this whole spiel about like, stop watching my shit and go make shit, you know, like you are.
Yeah.
And like actually doing shit. And so I had done that. So my buddy sending this to me, it just kind of seemed weird. Decided to go for it, hit up his video guy, D-Rock, multiple times, just kept basically harassing him nicely and in good taste, not being annoying about it, but just worked my face off for the opportunity to have an interview, and got the opportunity to get a job out here in New York, and moved out here, I think what, 2017, I believe. Yeah, the fall of 2017, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been here for almost 3 years now.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and like
So
as far as Gary is concerned, like I've been, like I can't remember the initial video or the initial piece of content for me when I first was introduced to him, but I've been following his stuff for a long, long time. And then when D-Rock was kind of like first introduced as like he's the video guy, and then Babin was introduced, and then there was these other
yep.
people, and I was like, oh, this is really, really cool. How he's kind of empowering creatives, especially on his team, to do stuff. And then like my first introduction, I think when I saw, I was like, oh, like I'm really vibing with this edit, because I could usually tell if like D-Rock was editing or if Babin was. And then when your edits started to hit the scene, I was like, oh, like there's some extra flair in here. And obviously, like, dude with a big beard, like tattoos. I was like, I don't know. I just connected with that a little bit more versus someone like Babin, who, like, I love Babin. I follow all of his stuff, but he's kind of like more clean cut, like limited tattoos, so to speak. I don't know. It's very weird in like hardcore to like connect over like, outward appearance
A
things
vibe.
in a way. A vibe, yeah. So I remember I was like, oh, okay. And then I started following your stuff. I was like, oh, this dude's into metal. This is sick. And then I think the thing that blew my mind was you spliced a Knocked Loose clip into one of his vlogs and put his face over it. I'm like, this is something I could have never imagined.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how much behind the scenes you want to share about like the process of shooting with Gary.
Yeah.
And like when you put that in, obviously like that's something that you thought would be a creative thing. But yeah, like what's kind of like the process with that, and how much have you pushed the metal or hardcore agenda in the Vayner office?
Well, first off, Gary's the best boss I've ever had in my life. He's the coolest dude. He's real. Like, um, we don't get to put out how much like dope shit he does, and like how like that whole clip was instigated because like we were talking. He had been on some business call. I asked him a question for content for the vlog, and he referenced how I love metal and how he doesn't know anything really about the scene, but how he's really quick at like picking up on trends and understanding subcultures. And he was saying like I could spend 2 to 3 weeks like deep diving into it, and I would have a really good pulse on what's going on
Right.
and what the right moves are for bands to make, right? And so then I just asked him, like, would you be down to jump in the pit with me or something like that? But that right there to me is like, I had always known he was a good guy just from afar in his content, but actually witnessing that he took note that like I love metal and I love this kind of music and I'm always talking about it, like that's cool shit.
Yeah.
So the second part of your question, how much do I push it? I mean, all the time. Like I'm always wearing like my GSP shit. Like I always have my hat on or something like that. So
Yeah.
all the time, everybody knows. Everybody that sits around me can hear it because it's just like blasting through my headphones. Gary references it often, and I don't know. I like it though because I feel like my goal is personally. I believe that there's a lot more people out there that could be fans of certain styles of metal and hardcore, right?
Sure.
I think there's so many subgenres. For one, like you could just throw something at the wall and you'll find something. But
Right.
I really do think that there is a lot out there for people that they would actually really like, and they just have not been introduced properly in a way that is palatable for them.
Yeah.
So I kind of view it as like my goal is to try and attempt to bridge that gap, because I love all kinds of music too. I love country, I love hip hop, and that's kind of the cool thing that I found that's melded well with a lot of like my coworkers and like Mike Boyd, who runs Gary's like playlist and basically all of his artist relations. Him and I have talked a lot, and there's like a synergy between the hip hop culture and what I think potentially hardcore and like the metalcore world could do over the next 3 to 4 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the nature of it.
Yeah, and like I've always told everyone, like, there's a lot of people who would be like, oh, I listen to all kinds of music, but then you like throw like a heavy metal record at them and they're like, ugh.
Yeah.
But half the time, like I'm a firm believer at, if you do enough research, you will find a band in a genre that you like. Like for me, like country is not something that I'll just throw on whenever, but there are
Yeah.
certain artists that have either been recommended to me from like people that I know in hardcore, like Orville Peck. I don't know if you're kind of familiar with his work. He's an artist out of Toronto, and I think like grew up playing in hardcore bands, but now he's like a country artist, and like so like that's how that kind of came into the mix.
Sick.
But yeah, like he wears a mask and everything. It's actually pretty dope. You should check him out for your next playlist.
Right.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that, like a lot of things, I think you're right that people would be into punk, D-beat, metalcore, heavy metal, deathcore. Like maybe there's certain things that like, don't get so deep into it, but like you said, picking a genre because there is a lot of, bands and different things to appreciate out there. A lot of people just don't want to sit down and sift through 100 records to like find the one that they're like, yeah, I'd be down with this.
And then there's the obvious ones, right? Like I've never played Turnstile for a friend that doesn't listen to this shit and they haven't liked it. Like everybody loves Turnstile when I play that shit. And like, people have their own opinions on Turnstile. I love them. I think they're also a great gateway into like heavier music as well.
Yeah.
Like I would consider August Burns Red my gateway into shit that's even heavier, and like, or different styles or whatever. But like, that's what we need more of, is like a wider net, I guess, while still staying true. I'm never trying to have people like sell out or like lose the actual essence of what it is.
Yeah.
But I just think that there's a better way that we can package it sometimes.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with someone being categorized as a gateway band, because if anything, a gateway band is a band that kind of like push the barriers of like what's considered acceptable in a genre. Like Knocked Loose is a super timely example of that. For me, like Trapped Under Ice was a big band to kind of push me into that more like authentic recording kind of hardcore, because there was plenty of bands that I was shared. I was like, why does this audio sound like shit? And then I was like, oh no, like it's that authentic sound to it. And maybe Trapped Under Ice actually just, there's a difference of some hardcore bands that just like, like I'm not gonna name names, but I have a homie back home who like was recording with a friend of mine, and he was like, how do you want it to sound? He's like, I want it to sound like shit. And then it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, do you want it to sound like whatever? And then when he ultimately like recorded it and it came out, he was like, this sounds too good. It's like, well, what do you want to happen? But overall, I agree that there is like some things. Going back,
and gateway is relative, right? Gateway is relative. Like
100%.
Like for me, Turnstile might be a gateway into what I deem as heavy, but for some people, Turnstile might be the heavy, and there might be something that like Turnover is the like whatever.
Sure.
I think it's all relative, But yeah, I love Turnstile.
I'm curious if you've shown Gary any hardcore bands. Like I know he's a busy guy, but I'm curious if he's been like walking by your desk and he's like, wait, what is that you're listening to?
I've never shown him specifically anything. Like I've never like thrown the headphones on him or anything. But the amount of times that we've been traveling and he just, by being next to me, like in the car or whatever, will hear shit through my phones, I'm sure is probably the case, but I've never actually sent him anything specifically. Though I do think that there are a couple of bands that he may actually be into. I think the new Varials album, it has a lot of like kind of hip hop feeling elements to it that I think he would really dig. So I think that's something that he would be into.
Yeah, you were mentioning via Mike Boyd, like, how there's a lot of things with like hardcore and hip hop that are connected. And like the one that I can't remember who said it to me, but like one thing is like the fact that hip hop is very supportive of like guest spots for like certain things. And like in hardcore, like everyone's like just itching to jump on stage just to do 2 lines and then stage dive off. I don't know if you have any specific, like, you know, even for me, like, you know, these are bands that I know that you fuck with heavily, but like, this is many moons ago, but like Gideon, when they were on their second album and they were touring around with it, they stayed at my house, and Daniel, who played guitar with them at the time, he was like, yeah, he was like showing me the album, and he showed me Still Alive, which is like track 7 or something. And I'm listening, Daniel's like doing his vocals. I'm like, yeah, this sounds sick. And then this other guy comes on, just so malicious, just like, I'm like, who is this? And it ended up being Matt from Cool Icon. And then that's what put me onto that band. So I don't know if you have any specific ones where you had that kind of same connection.
One, that is like my favorite thing in the world. I fucking love that shit.
Yeah.
I have had so many times where the amount, I am very new, and this may sound terrible to some people, but to the like kind of more hardcore scene. It's really been in the last year, maybe year and a half, if I'm being real. Like kind of the Knock Loose Varials counterparts was like what got me into it. And I'm slowly trying to learn more and more about it.
Right.
So obviously any suggestions you have, I would love. But like, that was one of the funniest things when I realized who Brian Garris was. I was like, oh, fuck, there's so many tracks that I've seen him like featured on or do a guest spot on that I just didn't know who he was. And I loved what it sounded like. So I completely agree. One thing I would love to see, if we're talking about like guest spots, I would love to see crossovers. Like, I wish our scene would do more of that. I know Volumes in kind of the metalcore world did something with Puya, or I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah.
But like, I would love to see more of that shit. Like, I actually think that like Jesus Piece should really be doing some like crazy crossover shit with some like underground hip hop artists. I don't know if you listen to like much hip hop, but like Scarlord is somebody that I really like. He's got like a lot of like screaming, like unclean vocals to his sound.
Yeah.
I think him with like Jesus Piece or something like that would be nasty.
Yeah.
Like, it'd be brutal.
And I remember like it was a few years ago that Gary kind of like, as he can in some cases, like predict certain things. So I remember, I don't remember exactly like what video, but he said in the clip where he was like, some rapper needs to do like something with like a country artist or something. And then lo and behold, like a few years later, you know, Lil Nas is like literally taking over the world. I think maybe his, the amount of remixes he's done have kind of run its course, but you know, crazy as far as how that changed, you know, like how that disrupted the country industry, but also the rap scene as well. Something was on my mind there. Yeah, there is that one, I'm trying to remember his name. There's a rapper who's like from hardcore, and he went on tour and brought a bunch of hardcore bands. Someone's gonna kill me in the comments for this.
I'm trying to think who it is.
I know that
like what kind of rapper are we talking about?
Like my friend Chad is like really like he fucks with them really heavily. But like he brought on Jesus Piece and
no shit.
I'm just gonna try and scour their Instagram to kind of find it. Oh, Ghostmane. Duh.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but so because I have to make a cut because I'm gonna be embarrassed for me just having to understand who that is. But yeah, like you know, stuff like that where Ghostmane is like taking out a bunch of hardcore bands because he gets the culture. And you know, like something at least when Gary was mentioning like, yeah, I can understand it, like something that I've been trying to do at least with this channel is like, you know, like build the brand essentially. So not only, you know, starting out with doing sets, but now we're doing this podcast and we got some other things in the mix. But because I truly believe that like people that are into hardcore, um, arguably want to like invest large like amounts of their financial earnings into that, whether that's through t-shirts, flying across the country to go see a festival and make friends and things like that, while a lot of things are just more of like, maybe this sounds critical, but like other genres of music are just more for like, oh, I'm just going, like I'm paying an insane amount of money to like go to this show, when like you or I could go to a show like this weekend, like no coronavirus in the mix, for like $10-15, if that.
Right. 100%. Yeah. I think one thing that's like super interesting is what you just said too, the price point, the accessibility of our scene. But I totally agree. I think that there are a lot of people that, I mean, like me, for example, I'm not like, I'm living in New York. My rent is expensive. Like, I go to every show I can. I buy as much merch as I'm able to every time, probably more than I should, honestly. But it's like, I mean, it's fun walking around with like that Jesus Piece hat. I fucking love that. But I think also it's like, it's important because we are fueled by this music. Like, I listen to this shit when I'm not in good places, when I'm in great places, when I'm working, when I'm partying, when I'm just chilling. And so like, if I'm going to, I guess, be such a consumer of the music, I want to be able to contribute in some sort of way, and I think that there is a large amount of us that feel the same way.
Yeah. And like it is very like, people like powered in a way. Like it's not like, it's very rare for like, cities to be handing out grants for a lot of like hardcore related things. Like, some people are, they're able to get things tight enough, so on paper it's just like a music festival, but then it's like, if anyone from like a, more governmental position is like going to this show that they like signed off, like, yes, we'll invest in this, and then saw people punching each other in the face, it'd be maybe like eye-opening for them in a way.
Right. Yeah.
You were mentioning shows in New York, and New York, especially for hardcore, is like kind of like a hot spot as far as like the amount of tours that will come through, and also just like legendary bands that have come out of that area. Do you have any favorite shows kind of pre quarantine, because New York's kind of in a weird spot right now?
Yeah. Oh damn, there's so many. Honestly, I'm in this like weird position where some of my favorite shows that I've seen have been at like one of my least favorite venues.
Okay.
And I actually really like the venue. Other than, I'll just say it's the Kingsland in Brooklyn, and like it's a great venue, but it's a little small. I like intimate. But there's this fucking pole in the middle, man. And like the amount of carnage, unnecessary carnage, not cool carnage, just like, oh, that is a bummer. Like
Right.
that you see just like coming out every time is ridiculous. But yeah, like do you like Body Snatcher? Do you listen to them?
Yep, I listen to
Yeah.
a bit of them. Yeah.
Every time I've seen them come through, I love them so much. They're awesome. I'm a big Varios fan, so I've seen a couple of shows of theirs. Actually, just the last show I went to right before quarantine, it was like maybe 3 weeks ago. It was the Spite, Varios, I Am Dealer tour.
That was the Root of All Evil tour.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. Spite, whew, they are great live, man. Oh, and Orthodox was there.
Right.
I don't know how I forgot. I love Orthodox. Yeah, that was probably one of my favorite shows actually recently that I've seen.
Yeah. We kind of, when like things really hit, I wanted to do like one episode that was kind of like fully focused on quarantine, and I got to chat with Andrew from I Am, and he was just saying like that tour was just like, he was just having so much fun. And so like, I think they had to stop in Minneapolis. It was when like they cut it off. There's some funny stories. Like it's with a couple other people, but he told some funny stories trying to set up shows last minute on the way back to Texas, and
That's
promoters
what I heard
can.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, he said there was one show that they were going to play with Varials, but they opted not to do it just because they had to drive out of the way, and then the promoter actually canceled the show because they put the COVID-19 virus on the poster. So the promoter's like, no, not in my place. Yeah, so
Damn.
that was pretty funny. But yeah, yeah, and that's one thing at least for like Western Canada, is like we don't get a lot of those because it's harder to route up. But like, man, if I lived in New York, I'd be going to every show that I could imagine. Um,
Yeah. It's it's unreal. And the thing is that I need to tap into better is the local scene. There's so many amazing local bands that I
yeah,
need. My schedule is pretty crazy with work, and obviously right now we're locked down. But uh, as soon as this lets out, like I'm fiending for some shows.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and I think it's kind of like in that progress where it starts with like a bigger show, and then like like it always takes like one person to be like, hey, this show is happening, like it's my friend's band or whatever, and then that kind of gets you introduced to all these people, and then you're just in the mix.
absolutely.
Yeah. So to kind of change gears just a hair here, you have a Spotify playlist that you update every week, so to speak,
Yes, yes,
called Serial. And
yes.
as soon as you announced that you were doing that, I was like on board immediately, just as far as how you were like branding it, but also just like, anything like hardcore related on a creative side is like 99% of the time I'm going to fuck with it.
Yeah.
So can you talk to me about like how that came to be? And like maybe some of cause you do like, when you do an announcement video for the new playlist, you've sometimes filmed in some like public settings. So maybe
Yeah.
talk about the origin and how you wanted to like, the vibe that you wanted to have with it.
Yeah. So the ultimate goal is it's such a strong statement, but I personally believe that bands in our space fuck up massively when it comes to creating awareness around their music. Strong statement. It's all with love because I love this scene so much. So my goal is, and it's an audacious statement because I've put very little time into it right now, but my goal is to build a playlist that I'm able to promote like I'm a band and create content to build something up in order to create somewhat of a blueprint for other bands to, maybe work with me in the future on, or just apply themselves just by watching what I'm doing.
Right.
Now, currently, I have very little time due to my full time gig. But like, as I get more and more time, I think that I'm seeing like in the next couple of months, I'll be able to have a little bit more time for Serial and like some other side projects. So I want to actually ramp it up to where it's something where I'm actually putting effort in. But that's basically my goal with it, is to help create a framework for bands to know how to create unique content that helps them stand out in a world where everybody's creating content
Yeah.
and their mother, And so, and I don't think anybody sees it as that. I think most people see it as like Caleb likes this kind of music and wants to create content around it. And I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah.
And that's also a big thing. Like I want to introduce, like I said earlier, a lot of people to this scene and different forms of the scene, like I like the angsty, shit as well. Like I love what some people would call like the emo pop punk kind of stuff. I love that shit too. So like I I love being able to kind of almost like put out everything that I like to listen to, and then also see like who responds to what.
Yeah.
I also find that really interesting, and I find it an interesting exercise in like, I don't know, trying to create a different not stigma, but like a different perception, I guess, around like metal and hardcore and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Because a lot of the guys that I've met are like some of the biggest teddy bears in the world. They're the nicest people. And like, obviously there's dudes that are also not super nice and, in that world. But like, I don't know, like I think that it's kind of fun to see like the dichotomy of like munching on some cereal, ideally Lucky Charms or, Captain Crunch berries. That's like this like colorful look. And the way it all came about was there was this dude that was on Gary's team for a while. His name's Elliot. And he runs a very successful agency, a lot of it geared towards like NBA players and basketball and that world. He has like @dunk on Instagram, and he was in the office one day, and we were just jamming in the kitchen, and I was telling him that I want to ultimately, actually, this is so funny that I'm saying this. My biggest thing is I just want to go up on stage with bands when they come into New York and like be able to do a guest vocal spot, one track, just with like all of my favorite bands. That's
Right.
really what I want, actually. If I'm being very real, I'm not good enough to ever create a band myself, but I would love to do that shit. So I told him that. I was like, that's what I want to do. I also want to help bands make money outside of tours and be able to like work full time on their music. I don't want them to have to go back and work at, the local Smith shop or whatever. Like, I don't want that. Like, I want them full time on this music because I want to keep consuming more of it.
Right.
And so I was telling him that, and he was like, dude, you should like sit in a room in front of a bunch of like Care Bears or, stuffed animals on the wall, eat cereal and talk about heavy shit. It's like, wow, that's a great idea. And I initially like went through the process of trying to figure out a studio setup and all that shit. And then I realized like, that's just going to take me too long. I'm never going to end up doing it. I'm going to make a playlist on Spotify right now, start eating cereal in front of the camera to promote it and just see if it works. And it was like kind of resonating with some people, like people seem to be into it. People that were not into that kind of music liked it, which I found very interesting. So I started like playing with TikTok, made this video that you were mentioning on the subway. And that did really good on TikTok. Like I did that months ago, like back in September when it was still not quite as big as it is now. And it got like 650,000 views and I had, 20 followers at the time. So I was like, okay, there's something to this. I don't have a ton of time, but here and there when I can, I'm going to try and make this a thing.
Right.
And yeah, that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah. And like, I think the magic behind it is like cereals, like, if you don't like cereal, you didn't have a childhood. Like there's all these different things as far as like growing up as like, oh, my mom didn't let me eat this cereal. Now that I'm an adult, like I hoard the stuff. But having that as like almost the intro, and especially like just eating cereal in like public places or just like on the go is like kind of just naturally just funny. But then, having that be the book cover, and then once someone opens the page and then there's like you said, like it's cool to hear that people that don't like metal or hardcore or breakdowns overall still were like, oh yeah, this is cool. Were there certain like things on the like, because something for me, and like you kind of mentioned it, like you want to be it's essentially a resource to bands, and the long-term goal is to eventually be working with bands. And something that I've seen is like contextually speaking, like creative stuff is not the first thing that bands think about. It's like the music and the live aspect, like playing shows, going on tour. But you're starting to see bands now like think about, okay, we're going on tour, we need a full-time photographer to come with us on this tour. So it's like we play a show in New York, we post that photo the next day to promote the show in New Jersey, and then like it just kind of continues from that front. But then there's even bands that are taking larger leaps, like Varials, for example, like hiring Eric Easterday, who's like, I'm a big fan of his work.
He's awesome. He's so fucking good. Yeah, I love his work. He's doing really unique shit in a space that is crowded by a lot of the same,
right,
in my opinion.
Yeah, but to like essentially take a band's like whole album release and plan music videos and like artwork and all that, like I can't even imagine how many hours he sunk in to get that right. And it shows, because like I've filmed bands before, and I hit up the band page or the Instagram to be like, hey, can I get a copy of your logo? And they like either they don't have a PNG. There's just a JPEG, and it's like I can work with that, but it's still like you don't have a PNG.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, there's like every album cover, there's a different logo. So it's like which, like I guess I use the latest one, but that one's actually looks sicker. So yeah, like I totally agree that bands need to think of that a little bit more critically, and if they don't have someone in their band that has a knack for that naturally, like having someone on the outside to kind of, you know, come in and, you know, especially like with what I'm doing, like I'm not expecting bands to like pay my normal salary, so to speak. A lot of creatives in our scene have made sacrifices to, you know, go on tour full time with bands and things like that. What's yeah, so like as far as like what's the end goal ideally like for you? Would it be like being in New York and doing stuff for bands, or like going on tour and like updating stuff along the way, or working with one band just like full time, so to speak?
The most honest answer I can give you is I'm not fully sure yet. I'm like, I I like the idea, one, career wise, I like the idea of flexibility long term. Eventually, I'd like to work towards uh, developing a reputation that deserves that.
Yeah.
Definitely not there yet. Working towards that, obviously, but that's the goal. And within that, I think it takes on a whole gamut of things. I don't want to just work with bands. Like I find commercial work really, really fun and fulfilling, like doing advertisements and stuff like that. I find doing documentary work on subject matter that has nothing to do with this super fascinating. And crossover too. Like I love doing work on like tattoo artists. I find that super interesting. But yeah, career wise, I'd like to just like kind of jump around and be able to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Within this scene, what I would love to see is I think that the unique thing that I've had the fortunate opportunity to pick up on from working on Team Gary and following Gary around is kind of like, I've always been the video guy with a little bit of like a business kind of branding, marketing kind of mind, but not much.
Yeah.
Just like a little bit, or whatever. But I think one thing that's really cool is I've been able to see how he, in glimpses here and there of how he operates and things that I want to be able to pull from that. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I'd really like to see is like bands thinking about how to make like merch, for example. I'd love for our scene to completely rethink merch, like scrap everything we know of it and think of it like they're a clothing line. Like Varials, I think they should be a clothing line, not like they're dropping merch for a tour necessarily. They're just an ongoing clothing line like Supreme or like Lurking Class, it's like different things like that I think would be an interesting shift that we could potentially apply. Small moves that would actually, I think, potentially help a lot of bands be able to make more money on an ongoing basis and stuff like that. So I think my ultimate goal is just to help empower them to be able to make a living out of it, and something that's long-term and sustainable, not something that, as soon as they have to leave this band and, they have something come up with family, like I'd love to see each individual set up for their own careers, because I feel like that's something that not a lot of people, understandably so, think about. Mm-hmm. They're musicians and they're focusing on their music in the moment, you know?
Yeah. And like, every band usually has a band dad or like a band mom that's kind of like thinking about things more critically and handling the logistics. I think you hit on a couple things there, because I think, there are bands, and maybe it's not like directly into hardcore, because like I've seen bands like run out of merch in the middle of a tour and they're like buying white t-shirts at like Michael's and then like spray painting on, and it's like, I respect the hustle, but for me, I would like never give you $15 to do that. Like that's just me personally. And like people can hate on me in the comments about it, but it's like, if I'm going to buy this No Right hoodie, like I want to like rep it, because not only is it a band I like, but it's like, it's a well-designed hoodie. It's printed on something that's not going to tear apart in 2 years. Yeah, I think that there's, slow moves that are making, like, I know I listened to a podcast with Brendan from Counterparts, and they have like one person that does all their merch. They don't really, shop around. It's like, you are the person that essentially is designing everything for us, and then they go over things together with lyrics from newer music. So I think, it's very easy for like other bands to like hate on bands for like giving a fuck about that, but it's like, these
Fuck
people are
that shit.
doing these people are doing pretty good as far as sales go. So like, I don't.
It's all about, in my opinion, I don't want to say that objectively, but like in my opinion, it's all about your goal. If your goal is just to stay like a very dope, like completely true to the original, and I don't even know what that necessarily means, but like what the origin of hardcore is,
Mhm.
and not try to grow and not have that be your full-time gig, that's fucking awesome. I love that. I just don't think that those people should hate on the other, and the other should not hate on the purists.
Yeah.
I think like it's like, what do you want to accomplish, and then you should work towards that. And I think that there are a lot of bands that start off at the more, and I really hope this comes across in the way I intend it, the more purist vibe, and eventually realize like, oh fuck, I want to do this full time, but I can't do this full time operating in this way.
Yeah.
We have to do certain things in order to generate an income.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm just one musician, there's five of us or whatever. So
Yeah.
like I think yeah, I agree with what you're saying basically.
Yeah, and like, something that, going back to Gary, what he said is like, if you work hard enough, you could find a way to, if you have a passion about something, you can make a living around it. Whether that's like, he's famously said things like Smurfs or whatever, but as far as like how that's applied to me, it's like, I know, if I was just a hardcore entity, whether that's just doing videos and podcasts and drum cams and a bunch of other ideas I have, I ultimately know that's not going to make me millions and millions of dollars. But I know that if I work hard enough and for long enough, it could potentially get to a place where it could, if anything, like substitute a lot of the day-to-day stuff that I need to do to make a living. But I totally agree that there are some bands that are like, maybe just in the mindset that it's like, it's hardcore, it's not going to put a dime in my pocket, and I'm just going to do it to do like, and if people just want to do that to hang out with their friends and go on tour, like, you like, great, rock on. Yep. Send it, brother. But if you like, I look at a band like Code Orange, for example, like starting so young, and just like, they are at that level where it's like, this is their full-time thing. They worked on an album for 2 years. Like, they didn't have to work on the album. Like, as far as I know, they didn't have to work on the album and go sling coffees at a barista gig or whatever. So, there's lots of those growths.
Real quick, when we talk about adapting quickly and being good on social, I wouldn't necessarily say like, I think that there's a lot more that they could do with like their socials or whatever, but their live stream was brilliant, and they did that so fast. And I was like, yeah, that was so sick. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've already talked about that with like 100 different people, because they obviously already hit the waves a while ago. But just to mention, like, that was so cool to me. And I love how quickly they did that. And I really, really hope that more bands figure out a way to do something of that nature.
Yeah. Like, I know a huge part of that was like, like reaching out to people like Sonny from Hate 56 to like help on the technical side of those things.
Do you know him?
Yeah. Like, I actually got to meet him in 2019. He came up for the fest that I filmed here. He was also filming it. It was crazy. He's like, check this out. He opens up his laptop and he starts like signing into his own personal server and showing me how he has things set up so everything's automatic. I'm like, that's wild. Not human, dude. You are a machine. But that's next level. He's a good dude. And like, especially like, because of what I do is like, it is directly inspired. Like, he is the reason why I'm doing that. But I can also count on like two hands the amount of people in the world that I know of who are doing this like so full time. But yeah, like, it is like, I've gotten messages from people. We're slowly trying to get things figured out. because it's always like, hey, can we do this with this band? But they're not practicing, so there's a lot of things. But if anything, this whole quarantine is hopefully not. It's forcing bands to write more music, which is exciting, but it's also maybe pushing them to have other things. Like one thing off the top of my head is like Stick to Your Guns. Just prior to this whole pandemic, they launched a band podcast, and I hadn't listened to Stick to Your Guns in like a number of years. Just not like my go-to band, but like they were talking about like old days when they were on the road, like a 10-year anniversary when Hope Division came out, and just like how things, so like things like that. It's like, okay, this band can't tour anymore, but they already have this like podcast platform that they can like communicate versus like just starting from scratch. So
that's so sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
So quickly going back to your serial, like I'm not even sure what to call it, your serial platform. You're also doing some video stuff as well, and you interviewed Matt from KublaiKhan, and you guys ate cereal together, which I thought was so funny. And then like I think the teaser clip was him being like, I'm drinking milk and I have to play in 15 minutes.
Yep.
I'm just kind of curious on what your initial DM to them was, and if they were like so gung-ho, or if they were like a little confused at the beginning, like you want to eat cereal with us in the van.
Let's see. Matt is no longer on Instagram, I don't think, right now. Let me see if I can find the DM. But essentially, it was a lot easier, obviously, after the first one. So, like, I had my videos of me eating. I can't find it, but I had my videos of me eating cereal, like on the subway and stuff like that, right? So, the general concept of like me eating cereal and music was kind of easy for them to get, and I would just say, "Hey, do you want to eat a bowl of cereal and just jam about what you do on camera?" And he said yes. And as soon as he said yes, I was like super grateful. And it made it so that like now I'm able to reach out to more people and say the same thing, but there's like a tangible thing that they can see of like, oh, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So currently I have, let's see, Dan from Gideon, Adam from Orthodox, and then Ryan from Fit for a King. And then I'm trying to figure out a couple more. I've literally had the Dan interview since like November.
Oh, okay.
I've just been like, this quarantine thing is terrible and it's awful. COVID-19 is horseshit. But for me personally, I have not currently had any friends or family affected by it. And it's kind of been a blessing being locked down and having to edit more.
Right.
I just have more time. Like, first of all, my commute to work is 2 hours round trip every day. So that's 2 hours of editing that I get right there. So yeah. But my initial DM is usually just like, hey, you want to have a bowl of cereal and jam about what you do?
And
and a lot of people love cereal, like you said earlier. So it's like a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm down. That sounds dope.
Yeah.
And I'm also trying to ask, I think, slightly different questions than like the typical interviews that I've watched, and I've seen them all on YouTube of like the shotgun mic, or whatever that the person's holding backstage, which I love, but I couldn't compete with that because one, I don't know the scene like you do. Like you are like an encyclopedia. I can already tell in talking to you. I'm not there. I'm still in the process of learning. I've only been into like I got into metalcore when I was like 17 and I'm 26 now. So like, that's like what, 9 years. So like not very long. And I'm just now discovering hardcore. So I kind of go into it with like an angle of ignorance. But I think that's good because it's like actually kind of helping me carry the new or undiscovered viewer along with me on that journey,
Yeah.
So I kind of had to take the other angle of like, asking people what they're binging on Netflix and stuff like that.
Yeah. But like some of that stuff like is nice to kind of break it up.
Do you mind? real quick. I'm sorry. I have to post on TikTok for
Oh,
Gary real quick.
yeah, post away.
Sorry.
No, that's
I'm
totally
sorry.
fine.
It's
Yeah.
literally just gonna take me a quick second.
I was like, oh, like I didn't know if you had like a like that's
Pills
the
I have to
max
take or
amount
something.
of time that I'll talk to Spencer.
Oh, fuck no.
Yeah.
No, we just recently upped our daily posting level to 5 clips a day on TikTok. So I am currently doing all 5 of those posts. So what I do is
Yeah,
I'll
narrate
show
it for
you.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically upload the clip, right? And right now it is processing. So I just go back and forth between the me button and the inbox until it refreshes, and then I just copy the link and send it into our like team WhatsApp thread.
Right.
So
Crazy.
literally, just, boom, there it is.
Yeah,
It's crazy, man. It's freaky. It's so freaky being the one that's like posting it. Like, it's an amazing opportunity, and I'm beyond grateful. But it's also kind of scary.
right. You're like, have I spelt everything correctly? Like,
Well, and oftentimes it's him actually providing the caption for it,
right.
which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Cool.
Yeah. That's so funny how you just like Gary just intercepted here. I'm trying to think
Always.
back to, so you filmed a lot of different upcoming serial TV episodes.
Yeah.
So you're kind of working on those right now. But I totally agree with you that like, you know, with this podcast, for example, like naturally the conversation is a little bit more loosey goosey, like things just kind of come up as they do. But yeah, like, you know, like growing up and watching interviews of bands that I loved, it was like kind of the same kind of questions. And I know when you posted your one with Matt from Cool Icon, he like shared it and essentially co-signed it to be like, this is the most fun I've had in an interview, which kind of took a shot at any interview that he's done. And he's done a fair bit. But I agree that, you know, the communication is ultimately the thing that is trying to do it. But, you know, some things like, I know, I can't remember who the publication that does it, but there's like a rig rundown, and it's like, it just feels so forced. It's like, okay, so this guitar is going into this, and it's just a competition of who can name the coolest piece of gear versus just like chatting about stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously, because it's a big publication, like they have people that can hit up PR people of other bands, and like versus a smaller creator like you or I can come at it a little bit more uniquely and authentically, I think.
Yeah. But honestly, I think all those publications should hire people like you, and bands should hire people like you. Like, personally, real quick, just to go down this road, I think what you're doing is what bands should be doing. Like, I think bands, like you said earlier about Stick to Your Guns doing a podcast, I fucking love that.
Yeah.
There's a band that is coming out with an album in the next couple of months that I was talking to there. And I was like, you should do a podcast about the behind the scenes of the recording, and like talk about the night where you guys were like, this is fucking trash, and like, we're not going to make it. We only have 2 days left, and we don't like 50% of our songs or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Like, those stories are like what us, the like real like hardcore fans love. You know, like Different Shade of Blue. Like, I thought it was a really, really good album, and I thought it had a different sound than anything they had put out before. Yeah. Similar to Knock Loose, but it had some different element. I would love in podcast form. I know they have videos and stuff leading up to it. I would love if they had a podcast that talked me through, like, you know, the different struggles that they had, why they, you know, tuned certain ways. And I'm not super musical and I don't understand tunings, but I still love hearing that shit, you know, because like, I'm a video editor and I understand the complexities of video. So like, I can at least appreciate, you know?
Yeah.
And I think shit like that, what you're doing with like all the videos, I think basically bands should operate, and you've heard this a million times, but like a media company, you know, and they should think about themselves not just in the form of audio, not just video, but in imagery and blog posts and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like my whole mindset of like, you know, documenting like really came from when I was like playing in bands, and I like would set up I don't know if you ever had a Flip Ultra HD, one of those little handicaps. Of course.
Oh yeah.
The little USB flip out on the side.
Yep.
But I had one of those growing up, and when my bands would play, I would set that up in the back of the room just so I had a copy of our set to be like, okay, like, you know, I want to change this aspect of this song, or like so and so like was like totally out of tune for like half the set. I think there was one time I played in this melodic hardcore band called Essentials, and my bass player Brent, he would like kind of like always goof off because I would have like moves that I would like to do, like spins or whatever, and he would always make fun of me for it. And then he was like coming up and jamming with me and trying to like jam off me, and then he like tried to like kind of shove me like as a joke, but then I almost fell off the stage and I'm like trying to recover. So like moments like that, I'm like super happy that I had the cameras rolling to like have that forever versus like,
Yeah, for real.
you know, I think there's a common thing in maybe hardcore or just like music in general where people just talk like story tell like memories, but like, you know, what Gary does is crazy because he'll tell stories and then he'll have the footage from 10 years ago to back up that story. And I'm just like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know how many terabytes of footage you guys have. Like, I'm sure it's just into the hundreds.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And actually that's a great point that you brought that up. And I think that's something that a lot of bands could be doing more of. A lot of bands are filming and documenting a lot. Like to your point, what you said earlier, how there's bands that are like starting to hire a photographer, they'll post like a photo the day after to promote the next day. I think that's great. But like they're filming awesome moments that are happening on the bus and backstage that could be like potentially micro viral clips within a community, you know, that could lead to a lot of awareness, you know, shit like that I think thinking about it in the way, because I saw like you take clips from your podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Like I noticed on your page, like that's what you do. You take like micro clips, as we call them, for Gary. And like, I think that bands should be doing that shit. I just think like a lot more content. Actually, out of curiosity, sorry to ask you a question.
Yeah.
What is kind of your goal with it? Are you trying to be an individual that people come to? Are you trying to create more of like a media publication? Like what?
Yeah. So I think Scoped started as a very like novice, like I just want to give back to my scene and film bands, because when I was playing in bands and no one would film stuff, it was like, oh, I want to watch that back because like Gavin punched Colton like square in the nose and he was bleeding, or like shit like that. So originally, like loved Hate 5-6. I was like, I want to do that just not even in Canada. That wasn't even like on my mind. It was like, I'm just going to do this in Winnipeg. People really liked it. People really appreciated it. So I just got hungry and hungrier. So I started filming the fest here in Calgary. It was under a different name. And it's just kind of exploded. And then like with other ideas, as far as like, you know, I love podcasts. I would love to interview people who are into this music, bands, record labels, like other archivists or photographers. Like the hunger for that just started growing and growing. And so I think it's kind of what you said. It's like, I'm still figuring it out, but like in a 5 years time, like I would be like, I think Scoped is kind of transitioning from being like a video channel and more being like a brand. And saying it's a brand opens it up to being like, we can sign bands, we can book tours for bands, like we can have a studio where we can do podcasts and like, you know, fly in people. But we can also like have that as an office space, or and I'm just kind of jamming. Like there might be people like, well, these are really ambitious goals, Spencer, but I really believe like there's something here as far as filming bands and documenting the process of certain bands, because, you know, Gary's been really influential in the channel, whether that shows or not. But like, I really believe that like a set that I film of a band could really pop off in like 5 years time when that guitar player ends up starting like the next band. I should send it to you because you're a big Jesus Piece fan, but Aaron um, shared like a cell phone video of like their very first show, and like no one's moshing. And I think the caption is like, yo, this is a clip of my first band. We don't have a name yet. And I was just like, this is like,
Wow.
to me, that's such a rare find. Like, that's so cool. But I totally agree that like bands who go on tour always have it as an afterthought, and they fully rely on the serendipity of like a photographer being there and posting it the next day to promote the next show. You know what I'm saying? When it's like,
Totally. And to no fault of their own, they don't have the money to be able to afford somebody of your caliber. You know? So there's the disconnect of like, we have to figure out how do we generate enough money for these bands in order to compensate somebody of your caliber versus just the, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And there is a weird, like, I think, you know, things are shifting maybe in a way where it's like bands are going to maybe like front that money, because like lots of bands have fully accepted that going into a studio and like having a proper studio experience is going to create a better record for them. But ultimately that's going to, like, you know, you're hiring the person, and then if that person isn't in the studio that you want to record in, usually it's a studio fee, and then there's mixing and mastering, and the list goes on and on. Artwork, but like usually that's the big ticket item, and then anything on top of that, it's like, oh, we don't have money for media. But then it's like, all you have to share is your music. But if you have photos to post with to promote the music, and videos with the music in them, and live performances, like I could kind of like just ramble on this for hours and hours, because I fully believe that like if you're a power violence band, there is no shame in like actually taking a step in towards a more modern media direction. Like, fuck whoever like gives you crap about that, because like it will do things. Like, there's been lots of bands that I film, they have no social media at all, and because it pops for us online, like people are like I'll shout out Chain of Command, this straight edge band that I filmed in Minneapolis. Like, no social media. People were like, this is so like this shit is popping. And then they were like, oh crap, we need to make an Instagram page now so we can share this set. You know, and maybe they were thinking about it already, but I noticed that as it was a few days after that set went up. So overall, I'm open to letting the things that happen and just pursuing certain things, and just being like patient. Like Gary says, is like, I don't want this tomorrow. Like, I'm not even like trying to think about like when I should have a Patreon or things like that. Like, because I'm just, like you said, I'm like building credibility. Like Sonny, who films band as well, like he filmed bands, and you know, like you can donate, but I'm not asking for money. Like, he set up his Patreon into 10 years of doing Hate 56. So who am I to like be 3 years into scope and be like, yeah, so can you give me a monthly subscription? You know, it doesn't make sense in my opinion.
Yeah. He has a paywall set up.
So how he has it set up is like people can be a patron and get certain privileges with that. So the content will always come out, but as far as people voting for sets, getting early access to sets, voting for certain bands to be multicammed at festivals, because obviously like just doing that for all of them is kind of tedious. As far as it's a lot easier to share a single cam set, like what I filmed is what I got, versus like I have to cut between two cameras. It's an extra step, as you know. So it's not necessarily like, and it's the same for Scoped. Whenever that happens, like it's never going to be you have to pay for the content. The content will always keep coming. But if we had some kind of consistent like money that was coming in, it's like, okay, now we can like fly to other places in the world to film more bands. We can, you know, get better equipment to like do cooler content pieces with bands, you know, fly people out to Calgary to do podcasts. So that's kind of at least on my mind. And I shared it all with you because you asked.
That's awesome. I love that. That's rad.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're kind of getting to the point where we can start to kind of think about wrapping up here, but we've kind of hit on a lot of things as far as pieces of advice for bands of whatever genre to consider for like building their, I guess, recognition as a band. And maybe because ultimately it's not like to build credibility. It's like I want to put on bands so they do sell more merch, so they do have better record sales and things like that. It's not just fun and games out here.
Right.
So what would be, if a band doesn't really have anything as far as like a person on their team that has a social media mind, what in your opinion would be like the first steps to take?
Go in on personalities and whatever that means. If it's, Jim, who's really quiet and won't say shit and is always drinking a fucking stout in the corner. Like, I think people fall in love with people. And I think as an up and coming band, one of the best things that you can do is try and personalize yourself. I think mystery is cool and all of that, but I think right now we're living in a time where that just doesn't work as well for an up and coming band. I think you earn the right to be mysterious. I think Code Orange is like, they're one of those bands. They've earned that right. And there are bands who serendipitously go through their career being that way and they just hit amazing spots. But I think for the majority, it takes a lot of work. And I think like, going on Instagram Live, going on TikTok. Like, I think, my boss says it all the time and I firmly believe it. Like, I think like Bring Me the Horizon, for example, went from obviously like metalcore to whatever we want to call what they're doing right now, which right. I think is still, it's not what I tune into every day. There are certain moods where I'm like really into it. Also, they're making dough. They're doing this for a living and they are hitting way more people than I will hit, So like, mad respect to them. They had a song that was trending on TikTok. That's huge. I think that there should be way more bands that are fucking with TikTok, not embarrassed about the fact that 10 months ago it was junior high kids. It's not anymore. It's a lot of people. Like, I think we can all like agree that the majority of people are on TikTok now and we should be jumping in on there and playing around as well. Sure. So I think like basically bands figuring out a way to practically create content around what they do best, in a practical way. So it's not like, most bands can't afford to hire, you to come out and film them on a tour or whatever. But what they can do is they can set their phone up and film their practice sets. They can, try to get clips from their homies in the crowd on their phone or whatever. And just like putting more up. I think I would try and build it like a framework of posting, 2 Instagram posts a day and 2 TikTok clips a day or something like that, and engaging on Twitter and stuff like that. I think there's a lot that can come from that. Obviously, you have the at bat of potentially having a clip gain more awareness for your band, but you also get to see how your current fans react to what you're doing. Yeah. And you can do more of what they like. And if you want to, you can do less of what they don't like, I think there should just be more of like with musicians, I think that there's a lot of experimenting and like, oh, I want to try this. I think they should think the same way with how they promote their music. Yeah. Let's experiment. Let's try this. Let's try the idea of doing a podcast for a month. Let's try going live every Sunday night and having a different band member answer questions and talk about, the video games they're playing. Let's try going on Twitch. You've seen a ton of people in our scene doing that recently. That's super smart. Shit like that. I think just having more of a testing mindset. Yeah.
And I think that's a really key thing. Cause like, a lot of people like outside of music or wherever in the world they're always concerned about like what they post. And like, ultimately like, you won't know until you're actually like getting the feedback. There's been tons of times where I'm like, I'm not sure how I've had to fully take remove any bias as far as like well, this band isn't really hardcore and they have singing and they're just a little outside of what our bread and butter is. And I've been like, well, I filmed all the bands at this show. I believe that every set matters to someone, even if it's just the members of their band and their grandparents or whatever. So I'm still gonna post it. And half the time, like I noticed over time, like people would still be like, yo, this is really cool. Like, thank you for putting out this set of this band from Red Deer. Cause like no one comes to Red Deer or no one knows where Red Deer is. So, like taking those things and just like you said, like experimenting, playing, like, any band who's in a practice space, like there's so much time of just like noodling with riffs and not really liking it until it is good, but you still need to actually hit the notes to figure out what the fuck the song is going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My hope again, like with this whole thing is like, I feel like you have a good mind as far as like the branding and the advertising, as far as like what you're doing on your day to day. So I hope, at least a couple people in different bands can like take little nuggets and be like, yeah, I think we are going to, like buy a camera so we can like post some stuff at some shows, or like we are going to hit up Spencer to like come out more or do whatever. So, yeah, I think
please hit up Spencer more. Please hit up Spencer more.
Yeah.
It's such a good move, because the cool thing with you too is you're not just thinking about it from a video perspective. You are thinking about it from like a post production, like what can we get out of this kind of perspective, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
And also too, like for the people watching this, like if there are people that are trying to like figure out what to do and they want to hit me up, like I'm down to try and help with like quick ideas and stuff. That's the thing, is like I'm beyond blessed to have a job right now, and so I'm able to pay the bills that way, and this is what I love to do. So any ways that I'm able to help other people that are doing what they love to do is also really dope.
Yeah, like I'm a huge advocate for like, supporting, local homies, and like ultimately if it wasn't for the first number of shows and bands that allowed me to film, like we wouldn't be here. So I always am grateful for that, and always encourage people to like, go out and try things, and you might just discover something that you love to do. And if it's related to hardcore, that's even cooler in my opinion. Cool. Caleb, well, thank you for coming on the pod.
Random idea real quick before we end it.
Yeah.
What if we came out with like a very, very, very basic, super basic, like PDF that was a how to get your content started kit. And it was like really simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like basic as fuck, 2 pages, 3 pages or something, but just kind of outlined like, these are some areas to start on, couple of best practices, blah, blah, blah. That'd be kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
To be able to direct people to, and just like, because I'm sure you get questions all the time of like, how do we do this? Like, we can't afford this, or we're not coming to Calgary, but like, we want to do something like what you're doing or whatever. Like, it'd be cool to just be like, oh yeah, just check this out. Boom, here.
Yeah, I've never really thought about doing like an actual document of like, in my opinion, what is the best way to like document your scene, and the ways to do that in a cheap or like free manner. Like there's like the fact that you could pick up your phone and take photos at a show and edit it. Like half of the people with iPhones now have fisheye cameras, so like like that's the style of photography that's popular. But yeah, we should jam on that in the future.
That might be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad that you brought it up. But the one little segment that I like to end these podcasts on is either a favorite show story or a favorite mosh story. And it doesn't need to necessarily be like, I punched this kid or I spin kicked this kid. It could have been something you saw, or, something that just, the first thing that comes to your head.
Yeah, there's a lot, but I'd say since we talked about my job a good amount and stuff like that, and I currently live in New York, we'll say New York one. I'm trying to remember who it was. I feel like it was a body snatcher show, and I think it was at Kingsland, that show that has the pole in the middle. Uh, and I don't really know how it happened, but I just got clocked like hard. And I'm pretty sure it was this chick that was probably like under 5 foot. And the reason why I say that is I'm 6'7", so I'm like a really tall, big dude.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how, but somehow she just like fucked my eye up. I've never had I haven't broken my nose, I haven't broken any bones or anything. Thank God, I have plenty of friends who have. Very grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah, she fucked my face up. Didn't realize it. Didn't realize it the next morning. Just kind of stumbled into work, honestly, and was filming Gary that day. And we had like this meeting where we were going. It was some business meeting that he had. And usually, what happens is like I follow him into the room, right? So he'll be meeting with like 2 or 3 people, and then there's me, this like really tall dude trying to look invisible in the corner or whatever.
Right.
And he hadn't noticed anything, but as soon as we walked into the room, and this was like an executive, like somebody that I want to seem somewhat professional in front of, even though Gary's chill. And he looks at me, he goes, "Dude, what happened to your eye?" And I like looked at my phone then, and it was just so like purple, yellow, like black, just like super fucked up in this very professional setting. It was just a funny moment.
Yeah.
But I think because of my height, I've stayed clear of a lot of like the bad shit. And since moving to New York, to be honest with you, like I'm not as tough as I thought I was. In Seattle, I was tough,
Sure.
But in New York, I'm like, oh, okay. I kind of hang on the perimeter a little bit more than I used to.
Yeah. I've heard some stories from like even like shows in like Chicago, and it's like scary times as far as the level of ass beatings that happen for those shows.
It gets violent, man. It gets really violent. Yeah. And it definitely depends obviously on the bands, but any of the beat down bands that come through, it gets pretty fucked up.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, again, thank you so much, Caleb, for coming on the podcast. Can you send us off with like where people can follow you, where people can listen to the playlist, just so I can kind of add your credentials at the end here?
Yeah, for sure. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Caleb Ralston, CALEB RALSTON. I'm trying just now, literally just today, I've posted a couple of things on it, but just today I'm going to start trying to build the Serial Instagram page. So that's serial.tv. And yeah, I mean, hit me up. Send me a message. Would love to jam. I always love talking music. And even more than that, I love finding new music. So if you have a band that you think potentially I would love to hear, especially considering that I am still a newbie to the hardcore scene, please send it my way. I would love to learn.
Yeah, cool. Well, definitely go check out Serial. It's something that I get to tune in every week, and especially the videos are a great little add-on to that. And yeah, I'm super, super humbled to be, FaceTiming with you, you giving me over an hour of your time and sharing some stuff about Gary, sharing some stuff about just your life. This has been one of my personal favorite episodes in the last little bit. So thanks, Caleb. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Spencer. I really appreciate like everything that you're doing, and I think it's fucking rad, and more people need to be aware of it. So Thanks, bro.
No problem. Thanks for listening.